Right, so all three judges ready? All right, let's begin. We affirm the thesis and sole contention of the affirmative case is that sanctions counteract Russian aggression. This is true for 4 reasons, and the first is coercive diplomacy. A comprehensive analysis by the IMF finds sanctions on Russia could lead to a cumulative economic loss of 9% GDP, as lower capital accumulation and technological transfers weakens an already declining economy. As a result, Richard Nephew of the National Interest explains sanctions could lead Moscow to compromise more. There is a better chance for a real diplomatic resolution of the crisis with sanctions than without them. Empirically, Davis of Notre Dame finds the use of financial sanctions increases the probability of compliance in negotiations almost twofold. Oleg Bakumishev of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace confirms the ceasefires and agreements negotiated in Minsk over the Ukrainian crisis were largely the result of sanctions. Progress has already been seen, as Fred Lampert of the UPI reports at the end of 2015, violence in East Ukraine has reached its lowest level since the beginning of this conflict following the agreement to reinforce the Minsk ceasefire. Looking forward, Simon de Galbert of the CSIS concludes the Minsk II agreement remains the only pathway currently on the table towards a long-term political settlement. Second is military setbacks. Mizukami of the Week explains, in 2015, Russia's defense budget increased by 25%. However, unable to end Russia's economic problems, the defense budget is slated to go up less than 1% in 2016, an unprecedented reduction. Cooper of the Moscow Times furthers, Western sanctions restrict access to technologies that can be used for military purposes. Thus, it will take at least 6 years before Russia can continue its 2020 modernization plan. Russia's domestic industry can meet barely 10% of advanced weaponry needs. Chris Demchak of the University of Arizona impacts, under a more developed military, there is a greater potential for the crisis to escalate through destabilizing military actions. Thus, Stratford concludes, the longevity and the competitiveness of the Russian military depends on its ability to meet modernization objectives. Third is unsustainable war. Elena Holodny of the International Business Times explains in May, money for Russia's military budget is coming out of the Kremlin's reserve fund, which is designed to soften the blow of economic setbacks. Western sanctions prevent Russia from borrowing on global markets, so Moscow had to tap into this fund to finance its deficit. Russia can maintain the current deficit for less than 1 or 2 years before it has to withdraw from Ukraine entirely to gain relief from the Western sanctions. Thus, Sean Walker of The Guardian explains in late 2015, with all sides tired of military conflict, the most likely outcome appears to be Moscow ceding the territories back to Ukraine. Additionally, sanctions have made it too costly for Putin to expand. Henry Pascoe of the University of Texas explains sanctions increase Moscow's ability to pay for occupying larger slices of Ukraine, preventing a Russian seizure of Kiev. Clifford Gaddy of the Brookings Institute concludes Russia could not afford to win Ukraine because much larger amounts would be needed to hold the rest of the country if they were to be cut from Western markets. Fourth is sending a signal. Robert Kahn of Foreign Affairs explains, any effect on sanctions must be weighed against the cost of doing nothing and the risk of protracted instability at a time when Russia is providing an unprecedented challenge to the existing rules of international order. Fred Kaplan of MIT furthers, the West's sanctions deter Putin from going further. Putin's actions are those of an opportunistic tactician. He will go as far as he can, but no farther. Sanctions work because they convince Putin that grabbing more land will mean real trouble. Jana Dreyer of the European Institute for Security Studies concludes, the city of Mariupol was not seized by Russia when it easily could have been. There has been no attempt by Russia to forge a corridor bridging Russia to Crimea, let alone Odessa and Transnistria. In other words, sanctions minimize the risk that Russia will seek to destabilize other parts of Ukraine or countries like Moldova and Georgia. At a global level, sanctions signal that military ventures will come at a cost. Overall, the most important impact in this round is preventing interstate conflict because, as Graham Allison of the Center for National Interest explains, in the 21st century, a failure to prevent Russian aggression could escalate to mass destabilization and global conflict. For these reasons, we are very proud to affirm.
Judges ready? We negate resolved on-balance economic sanctions are reducing the threat Russia poses to Western interests. Contention 1, retaliation. Sanctions drive Putin into a corner, forcing him to lash out to get rid of them. Fisher-Vox reports that weakening the Russian economy will make Putin even more aggressive and less willing to compromise. Retaliation has been seen in 2 cases. First, Ukraine. Ashford of Cato finds that after economic sanctions, Russia's aggression grew with the formal annexation of Crimea. Sanctions forced Putin to escalate the Ukrainian crisis. crisis, to escalate the Ukrainian conflict even further to try to force a better deal. Indeed, Nathan Independent reports that Putin ordered 50,000 more troops into Ukraine this past summer. As a result, the situation in Ukraine is once again on the verge of open warfare. In fact, Bruce of New York Times calculates that civilian deaths in Ukraine have doubled since sanctions were enacted. Second, counter-sanctions. Russia extended its food import ban in retaliation for Western sanctions. Sana Wall Street Journal reports that consequences of Russia's first sanctions have been felt in European agriculture. In fact, the Russian food embargo has caused the recent decline in global dairy prices to a 30-year low. Russia's ban on EU food has led to a slump in demand and sharp drop in payments to farmers. In Sweden and Denmark, 86% of farmers face bankruptcy if the situation does not improve. Overall, Institute of Economic Research finds that sanctions have cost Europeans 100 billion euros in economic development and 2.5 million jobs. Contention to the Middle East. Sanctions give Russia two main incentives to increase conflict in the Middle East. First, perception. Tamerko of Guardian explains that Putin entrenching his military in the Middle East makes him more influential on the global stage, allowing him to sidestep the harms of sanctions. Fisher continues that Putin views threatening Western interests in the region as a bargaining chip to get sanctions lifted. Second, economy. According to Adamski of Foreign Affairs, sanctions crippled and inflation hit Moscow sees economic opportunities in the Middle East. Because sanctions prevent Russia from accessing Western money supplies, they turn to volatile countries in the Middle East. There are three impacts. First, Iran. Policy Foreign Initiative reports that Russia has moved to strengthen a partnership with Iran to weaken U.S. influence in response to sanctions by selling S-300 air missiles. Defense News finds that the sales have begun as of November. This poses a massive threat to Western interests by undermining the Iran nuclear deal, which stopped Iranian nuclear proliferation by threatening airstrikes. The S-300 system nullifies any Western attempt to halt Iranian nuclear proliferation. LePan of Gaystone Institute explains that Iran can use the S-300 system to harden air defenses around its multiple nuclear sites, making any potential future air attack on Iran's nuclear development facilities significantly more difficult and solidifying their nuclear status. Additionally, the increased cooperation between Iran and Russia allows Iran to project its power with relative impunity, allowing them to confidently continue exporting arms and terrorism across the Middle East. Second, Middle Eastern arms deals. Cafiero of Foreign Policy reports that Russia is turning to signing arms deals with Middle Eastern countries in an attempt to offset the economic loss from sanctions. Recent arms and energy deals between Russia and Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and other states have substantially increased. Earlier this year, Putin traveled to Egypt and signed an arms deal worth $3.5 billion. Russia and Jordan signed a $10 billion deal in which Moscow agreed to build the country's first nuclear power plant. The Russian decision strengthens Middle Eastern countries' negotiating positions and puts additional pressure on Western states. Third, Syria. The Hill states that Russian presence has bolstered ISIS, with 90% of its airstrikes targeting moderate groups who are fighting ISIS. The Daily Mail corroborates that this reduced opposition has allowed ISIS to grow. ISIS recruitment in Syria has increased substantially following Russian involvement, which is detrimental as ISIS is a threat to the West because of its intention to cause harm. Russia exploits this opportunity to gain influence in the Middle East, rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. For all these reasons, we strongly urge a negative ballot.
Before we begin class, can I have your evidence about Russia selling S-300 missiles to Iran?
Like specifically when they were sold and when Iran got them.
Okay, so you want the time, and we read two other cards.
I just need like a piece of evidence that says that they actually went through with the sale.
Sure.
Actually, while they're finding evidence, we'll use prep to save time. All right.
There are 2 times when it's going goes until August. Yeah, but then it goes up until December. That's an decrease. Yeah, they decrease by 2.6 times. 2.6 times. All right, we use 14 seconds.
Yeah. sure. We'll resume. Wait, no, this
Wait,
is not
this
what we called
isn't-
for.
yeah.
We said the evidence that they actually sold it to Iran, not that if they sold it, it would be bad.
This is, they announced the sale.
Oh,
That's not what
we're-
you highlighted,
Like,
so.
oh, okay.
Wait, so it's that paragraph?
And I feel like the whole thing is talking about is 300.
Just-
This
oh, we
is the
just- we
specific
don't-
part that we read.
Oh, we just want the part that you read that said something like there was a confirmation that the sale actually went through.
Like, do you want the announcement?
Okay, that's
Okay.
fine.
Right. Wait, do you still want
No,
to?
we don't need it.
Yeah, we don't need that.
So, count is like about 20 seconds used total. Alright, cool. Ready,
Yeah.
Okay, so okay.
I have the first question.
Sure.
So what happens in a world without sanctions?
We don't have the burden to defend a world without sanctions.
Well, I mean, the only way to determine if sanctions are good or bad is to look in a world with and without sanctions.
But
right?
in a world without sanctions, you would have no way to assess the alternatives. Like, you have no idea what the West would use.
Okay, so
against.
let's talk about the different alternatives that are possible. So one is diplomacy.
That's actually that's impossible to cover
Why?
within this debate round. This debate round asks us to focus on economic sanctions, not
Yeah.
some hypothetical alternatives.
Well, here's the thing, right? The only way to determine if economic sanctions are good or bad is to see a world again, like if we have these sanctions or if we don't have the sanctions.
Actually,
So,
no. It says
how
are
else-
reducing, so that's present progressive, meaning
Okay.
continuing action from present to
Okay,
future.
then let's
not
talk
the
about
past.
what happens. Well, then how do we evaluate if sanctions are good or bad?
By seeing their continuing effect
Okay,
on Russian aggression.
so they're
Can I have the
continuing.
next question?
Well, this is the thing, right? The continuing effect on sanctions is that they've been like reducing the threat that Russia poses.
Okay, like we would
So-
argue otherwise.
Okay,
but
sure.
Can I have the
You
next
can-
question?
go ahead.
Okay, so how useful is the Minsk agreement insofar as there's about 1,000 violations every single month?
Which Minsk agreement are you talking about?
Minsk 2.
Okay,
The most
after-
recent one.
Okay, the thing is that's not the most recent one. There is the Minsk II reinforced agreement that actually was related directly to the sanctions. After the sanctions were compounded with the agreements and the sanctions, that's when
So-
we saw a decrease in violence.
So why do we see a doubling in civilian deaths?
That was after the Minsk. That was either after the Minsk I agreement or after
So when
not
was
being
this
enforced by
Minsk
sanctions.
2 reinforcement deal?
I think it was in January, but I can get back to you on that. Like
It was
this.
in January 2016,
I,
what date?
I can get back to you on that. I don't remember like the
Okay,
exact date
sure.
it was placed. So can I have a question?
Yeah.
Let's talk about your 50,000 more troops, right?
Mhm.
Where is the source from?
I can give you the card afterwards if you want.
Okay, I think I saw this source and it was from Infowars, correct?
It's from Independent News.
Okay, sorry, Independent News cited Infowars, right?
I don't know. Nathan of Independent. was
Okay,
the author
because
that we
if
gave
I
you.
know the article, Infowars cited this from a Reddit or a Twitter post, and that
Actually,
Twitter
like,
post had like
that's-
literally no way to
Wait,
get
that's
this
like
number.
not true, right? We have
Really?
the card.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
take a look at it later.
Yeah,
So let's
okay.
talk about your civilian.
Actually, can I have the next question?
Go ahead.
So you talk about how like the defense budget is increasing less than 1%, but
Mhm.
insofar as we've already seen
Well,
a 33%
wait.
increase, like how is that
Oh,
happening?
this is the thing, right? It was 33% in 2014. In 2015, it reduced to 25%, and it's projected to go to 1% in
It was
2016.
33% 2014 to 2015.
No, it was
After
tw-
economic sanctions were imposed.
During the time of
So
2014,
Russia's military
it was
budget still took a
33%.
hit.
But then after we imposed the target sanctions of what we have now, it reduced to 25%, and it's expected to reduce all the way to 1% in the future. So can I have a question?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
How is this in any way related to sanctions?
So what we're telling you is that because economic sanctions caused Russia to throw away their relations with the West, that's why they're giving Iran S-300 S-300
Okay, so
missile
why didn't
systems.
they just do it before?
Because they wanted to preserve relations.
So are they friends with Iran now?
Yes.
They
because
are
of
friends?
economic
So they
sanctions.
want Iran to have nuclear weapons?
I never said they're giving Iran nuclear weapons. They're giving
Well,
them S-300
I mean, they're-
missiles, which solidified their defenses around their nuclear
S-300
sites.
missiles are ICBM missiles, right?
Alright. We'll use some prep time. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem.
1 minute used.
Oh yeah, overall.
Overall, yeah.
All right, cool. What was the total?
Total is about sorry, hold on, let me do this math really quick. Just a little bit, like 115.
Sounds good to me. So I'm just going to give a brief off-time roadmap. I'll be going over a framework for today's debate and then going down and responding to their case. With that in mind, is everybody ready?
Yes.
Let's start with an overview for how you're evaluating today's round. You can look to the Brookings Institution, which explains that sanctions are a dynamic tool that are utilized when military action is guaranteed to make things worse, diplomacy is off the table, and doing nothing is not an option. And that's the most important, because even if you're just looking to reducing the threat, you have to consider that in a world without sanctions, if it is worse, sanctions are preventing that outcome from happening, and that's the benefit of sanctions. As a result, we tell you that Putin is opportunistic. The MIT evidence in our case is very key. It says that if we didn't impose sanctions, Putin would see it as an incentive to take more land because he doesn't think that we're going to do anything to stop him. So that means that Putin's going to intend to be more aggressive in the negative world. But more importantly, understand that Putin's always going to want more land, but in the affirmative world, we have a probability of reducing his capability for expansion. And because threat and capability are the or intent and capability are the two factors in the threat, since capability is the only one that can be changed, the affirmative always outweighs their case. With that in mind, let's move to their contention one about reallocation and retaliation. First, they read you this Fisher evidence, which says that when you harm their economy, they're not going to compromise so much. You can turn this against them because, according to the Wall Street Journal, Putin is a rational actor. He understands that when the West has a response, he cannot react with more aggression because that's just draining his resources more and making his people turn against him. That's why in the long term, we tell you that in just 1 or 2 years, he's going to have to withdraw from Ukraine because his entire reserve fund is running out. That's going to turn the contention against them. But now let's move to their first example, which is annexing Crimea and making the Ukraine problem worse. First, remember that this is not the effect of sanctions, but rather the cause. Aggression was going up prior to sanctions, according to Pascoe and McCormack of 2015, and sanctions have made it so that it wouldn't have been even worse. That's why when they tell you that he wanted to force a better deal, we tell you in our case that the only reason he signed any deal, which is the Minsk II reinforcement agreement in October, and which has seen benefits moving into January, that was because of sanctions. That would not have happened in the negative world. Now let's address some of their statistics. First, they say that 50,000 troops went into the summer, but that's just not true. Because one, if you look at their source from the Independent, no source on the internet besides the Independent and InfoWars report on that 50,000 statistic. And InfoWars is citing Twitter, and the Independent is 1 day after InfoWars. Their source is extremely flawed. But even more so, their own evidence doesn't say that they crossed into Ukraine, just that they were on the border of Ukraine. Understand that the reason they didn't cross over is because of us. Because we tell you from the Getty evidence that Russia doesn't even have the money to hold more land anymore, so he has no point of sending those troops over the border. We outweigh their point. Next, they say that there was a 2 times increase in killings, but that evidence ends in August. That's when the recording of those numbers stopped. First, look to the International Business Times in December, who finds that overall Russian aggression and therefore the killings of civilians is 2.6 times lower now. That's comparative analysis, and that's because of the Minsk II reinforcement. And next, the Stratford Institute in January, which finds that overall violations of the ceasefire have dropped 4 times because of the leverage because of sanctions. That's turning the contention because it's more recent. Now on counter-sanctions, they say it's going to harm the economy. First, lives straight up outweigh money. They have no impact here unless they can prove a loss of life. Second, look to Stratford Institute again, who finds that in the long term, these countries are just moving to other trade partners, so Russia's actually not harming their economy. Their statistics about 100 billion and 2.2 million jobs, according to the Carnegie Endowment, are based on flawed statistics that don't account for the fact that European countries can just find other trade partners. They're just projections, and the real world Stratford finds that the overall harm to these European economies is less than 1%. It's not a major impact. Now let's move to contention 2 in the Middle East. Their first warrant is perception, and they say that Russia wants to show that they have game. First, they would still do this without sanctions because Putin's opportunistic. At least in our world, he doesn't have the capability to do it. But second, the nephew evidence in our case is key, and it says that through sanctions we get leverage on Putin so that he compromises more, that turns us against them. Next, they say he will turn to other countries, but according to Forbes, overall Russian trade, accounting for other countries, still dropped by 30% post-sanctions, so we're still outweighing this point. Now on their examples. First, Iran. None of their evidence says he actually sold the weapons. The Washington Institute finds that Putin is just threatening this. He would never actually do it because 1, him and Iran have never been allies and never will be, and 2, and much more importantly, if he gave it, he knows that we would just harm him with more sanctions. Next, they talk about arm deals, but according to the IBT, the arm deals were because of a buildup of military capacity in the 2000s, nothing to do with sanctions. And finally on Syria, according to The Guardian, just 1 week ago they started cooperating with us, and now 90% of their targets are ISIS because we put the leverage of sanctions that turns the contention against them on recency, and thus we affirm.
Okay, can I see some evidence?
Yep.
Okay, so the reinforced Minsk in October,
Yep.
Secondly, that 90% of the targets are now ISIS.
Yep.
And then lastly and finally, the 2.6 lower deaths.
2.6 times lower.
Yes.
So you don't want the 4 times violations,
No,
just the deaths?
that's fine.
Got you. I'm going to go in reverse order, just
Yep, no
that's how
problem.
we get that. Okay, so you don't mind that there's like, I have it open in Chrome, right?
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. And it's sourcing the International Business Times. And we should probably list it. This is reduction in killings, the statistic. Let me see the specific percentage that we cited. Percent. There. Oh, 232%. Sorry, 2.3. My misreading.
Okay, can we get all of them at the same time, actually?
That's just going to be difficult. I don't know. I
Maybe
can
like
do.
save them as a PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Thanks. Yep, I'll just take them all at the same time.
Yeah. So you wanted 2.3 times, you wanted the minus 2 reinforcement. And
Yep. 90% are now ISIS targets.
Robert, can you hand me the case really quick? Yep. Okay. Okay, there we go.
Yep.
So this is the 90%. It says it used to be only 10% ISIS, and those proportions have now been converted in the last week. And it says the majority is ISIS leadership now.
Okay.
Okay. And then this is the balancing East Ukraine. This is just following the agreement to reinforce the ceasefire, and the agreement was September, and then the statistic from December, the last one you wanted, just went this way, and it's still here. Okay.
When was the reinforced?
The reinforcement agreement was in September, and then the effects, we're reading the evidence from December.
Can I see the evidence that is from September? Because this
It
is
says the September 1 agreement, and this evidence is from November.
All right, so we'll start prep now.
This is all time of November.
All right, stop. We got 28 used there.
Alright. Can we just get our stuff back?
Yep. All right, are all three of my judges ready? Everyone's good? Opponents? Joyce? Okay. Begin with how we should evaluate today's round. Threat has two components, capability and intent. They need to prove a reduction in both capability and intent for them to access the round. With that in mind, let's respond to my opponent's arguments. Their first subpoint talks about coercive diplomacy. A couple of things here. Remember that actions speak louder than words. Just because Putin verbally agrees to something doesn't mean that violence is actually going down. In fact, according to Galbert of CSIS, there are 900 violations of the Minsk II agreement every single month. Clearly, this ceasefire diplomacy isn't working because Putin is not respecting the word. That's why we've seen a Minsk II agreement, because the Minsk one failed. He's not respecting any of these ceasefires, and we've only seen more violations. And he's using this time during the ceasefires to restock the rebels and only increase his violence. Go to their second subpoint where they talk about a military setback and reducing military spending. Two very key responses. First, directly turn this argument against them. Andy Burkov of Bloomberg explains the concept of military Keynesianism. In response to sanctions, which are devastating Russia's economy, Putin is turning to military spending to try to jumpstart his economy once again. In fact, the Associated Press explains that Russia's military budget has risen by 33% after sanctions were imposed. This is in 2015. Clearly, in the world with sanctions, Russia is only turning to more military spending. They're spending 33% more on their military budget. This directly translates to a more capable Russian military, and in fact, according to Al Jazeera, they've added 40 new nuclear warheads. Clearly, everything is getting worse in a world with sanctions. Secondly, even if you don't buy this, the Swedish Defense Research Agency explains that Putin is restructuring the Russian economy so the military sector is immune from these military budget setbacks. In fact, historically, he's cut money from education and pension just to funnel more money into the military, so at the end of the day, Putin is not cutting money from the military, and in fact, in the real world, he has only increased it. That's why the threat is going up with sanctions. Go to their third sub-point, where they talk about unsustainable war and how Russia would have to pull out of Ukraine within 2 years. Their evidence specifically hinges on the fact that Russia has a finite amount of reserves, but this directly feeds into our argument. Because of the sanctions which prevent Russia from accessing Western markets, now Russia is turning to even worse places like China, Iran, and Middle Eastern countries and signing multi-million-dollar arms deals. In fact, immediately after sanctions were imposed, he signed $9.5 billion worth of arms deals with Egypt, and he's only pumping more weapons into the Middle East. This is a very clear harm, and he's only giving S-300 missiles to Iran. That means this turns the argument against them, because not only is it replenishing their reserve system, but it's also getting more money into more volatile actors. Go to their fourth subpoint, where they talk about how we're sending a signal. Understand that according to the Washington Post, Putin weighs expansionism in Ukraine above economic decline. In effect, Putin was elected on the platform that he was going to restore the glory of the Soviet Union. He values expansionism over all else. There's no signal being sent to him. In fact, that's why we've seen him become more brazen in his attacks in Ukraine. Now let's go to all of the evidence on Ukraine here, where there's lots of evidence. First, according to Nick Bruce of New York Times, after sanctions were imposed, the amount of civilian deaths doubled. Their evidence comes from August, which I read, and our evidence comes from September. That means we post-date their evidence, and more civilians are being killed in a world with sanctions. Secondly, with the troops, they say 50,000 is flawed. That's fine. According to the Daily Express in December, they're actually sending 20,000 troops into Ukraine, and this is clearly going to be a bad thing because conflict is escalating. And more importantly, let's go to the regions on the ground. In fact, according to the Gershwin Institute, on December 28th, which is very recent, in fact, Russia is launching a siege on the city of Mariupol and is escalating violence in the Donbas region of Ukraine. And thirdly, according to the Washington Post, on January 9th, Putin just launched a siege of Odessa on their oil rigs. That means on all fronts, they're invading Odessa, Donbas, and Mariupol. This is the most recent evidence in today's round and shows that aggression in Ukraine is increasing. Because more lives are being lost when sanctions are in place, we urge you to negate the resolution. Thank you. Yes.
All right. You read the Galbert evidence saying that after Minsk 1, every month there were 900 ceasefire
No,
violations.
Galbert is not for Minsk 1.
Okay, you said Minsk 1, Bill.
Sorry, there are
Fine.
two responses.
Wait, really quickly.
Wait, can I respond to your question? Two things there. Galbert is response to Minsk 2, which says there are 900 violations per month. Secondly, the other response was that Minsk 1 failed, and Minsk 2, he's not respecting these ceasefires.
Really quickly, after we actually enforced the Minsk 2 with sanctions, how many ceasefire violations were there last month?
Last month, I can't tell you, but I can tell
Wait,
you.
I can tell you.
As of
I
1
can tell
week
you.
ago, they've invaded Mariupol,
Now you're
Donbas,
shifting
and
to another issue. We have responses
Odessa.
to that as well, but really quickly.
Right, no, your evidence is
Can
from
I answer?
August.
Can
I looked at your evidence.
Can I answer?
Go ahead, yeah.
They violated 11 times last month.
No, I
compared to
looked at your
900
evidence.
No. The Stratford 4 times decrease, 11 times last
Sure,
month.
I'd really love to see that evidence.
We
But
offered it
so-
to you and you
but
didn't take it. It's in January.
Sure,
in
we'll
the
look at
first
it again,
week.
but that doesn't matter because on January 9th, they're invading 3 different regions of
okay,
Ukraine.
It's fine. So here's the thing.
Can I have
right?
a question now? You
No,
just
because
asked
you
one.
just brought up a new point and I want to respond to
Wait,
that. Or at
but
least
you
have
just asked a
on it.
question. Can I have a question,
Fine,
please?
we'll get back to
All
it.
right, so let's talk about funding the reserve system, right?
Yeah.
So you say that Russia has to pull out in 2 years because
Yeah.
they have reserves, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't this assume that they have like a finite amount in their reserves?
So here's actually
that doesn't account for replenishing their
I get your
reserves,
point,
right?
Alex. So here's the actual real kicker: is that the way financing military works is that you don't use your public budget because you have to shelter your public from the cost of war.
Okay,
Russia,
that
wait, let me answer.
Go ahead.
Russia finances its budget only through borrowing. The thing is, even though they're
yeah,
getting trade
so-
from other wait, let me answer.
Go
Even
ahead.
though they're getting trade from other countries, both Iran, who we have leverage over through sanctions, and China, who's our number
Right.
1 and number 2 trade partner,
So
will not
he's-
send money to Russia for them to use for
Okay,
their
let me
military
let me address
expansion.
that. He's actually getting $9.5 billion from these arms deals in the Middle East. That's clearly more money into replenishing his reserves.
First of all,
and as a result, he's invading more regions
You're just
in
making
Ukraine.
a speech here. I'm actually trying to have a back and forth, right?
Right,
First
you're
of all,
just
we
responding
responded.
that-
I know, because we want to have a discussion here, and we're just having a back and forth. First,
Right,
on the
go
arms
ahead.
deals, we told you that's not because of sanctions. Second, we
Right,
told-
okay, so let's address that
Wait,
right
wait.
now, right?
No,
So,
let's not address that. That's responsive.
wait,
I'm
no,
just-
but you're responding to my argument, right?
Because you're
so
just ignoring all of our
Putin
responses we've
needs
already
money
made.
from somewhere after sanctions,
Yeah.
right? That is the unique reason as to why
So-
he's turning to other Middle
so-
Eastern countries
so
to
here's
get
the
money.
here's the
and
best-
that's why he's funneling more
that makes
weapons
sense.
and more
That's fine.
S-300 missiles
Overall,
into the Middle
overall,
East.
how much is Russia's trade revenue increase or decrease after sanctions, accounting
We're
for
t-
all countries?
Right, we're telling you you're getting $9.5 billion from
Overall,
Jordan and
net
$3.5
benefits,
billion.
it's an unbalanced
You guys
resolution.
don't provide any evidence
Yes, I did.
either.
In the last
you
speech-
guys just say
Alex,
that
you're
the
cutting me
reserve
off so I
system
can't
is
read the
finite.
evidence. In
Go
the
ahead.
last speech, I said overall Russian imports and trade decreased by 30%.
That doesn't matter insofar as the materialization of this argument is actually we're seeing Odessa's being taken as of 1
You
week
just keep
ago.
shifting back to the same point.
No,
Guess what?
so
Russia had plans to take Odessa in 2014.
Your argument hinges on the final impact of your argument is less aggression in Ukraine. If we win the fact that our most recent evidence is showing you that there are more deaths and they're invading more places, that means we win the argument.
Last thing, our evidence
That's
is from
actually time
December,
right now.
not August.
That's fine. Ours is from January.
It cites August.
Alright, so I'll be taking.
Really quickly, can we see your evidence that says that your evidence is from January 2 times deaths?
That's not what I said.
You just says ours is from January. That's a quote.
I wasn't referring to that card.
Okay, so can I see 2 times deaths and how it postdates our evidence?
I did not refer to 2 times deaths. I
No,
referred
just
to
in general, you
invading.
said the 2 times.
Do you want the
deaths.
January card or the 2 times
The
deaths?
2 times deaths?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do you guys want to start prep time?
Oh, we're just waiting for the evidence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me.
After that, we'll decide if we need prep.
Are you guys resuming prep now?
Wait, can you show me the month that it said it looks at? Not the date of the article, but what?
This is the complete context.
It says April 2014.
No, you're reading the wrong part.
It says in April 2014.
Right, okay,
Zine
let's-
said in the statement issued.
No, so recent 3. You can bring some in summary, but
Okay,
here's the card
yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking
sure.
about. Yep.
All right,
We'll take one.
we'll use prep.
This April 2014, it's a statement from one guy. Doubling the violence. The ceasefire violation, they dropped to 11 last month. This represents a jump for also, they said they tried to take Odessa and all this land, right? The categories, they don't have that money to it. So the 2.3 times isn't from August, it's from December, and this draft record is from January. Just 3 cards that are most recent. One is December, IBT.
Time.
Alright, so the order is going to be overview, our case, turns on their case. So with that being said, everyone ready? Start off what Devesh tells you. He says from Brookings that the only alternatives to sanctions are military action, diplomacy, and doing nothing. We tell you that military action and diplomacy not only don't work, but they're going to increase aggression, and doing nothing is worse because Putin is opportunistic. If we do nothing and if we don't impose the sanctions, he's going to see that as an opportunity to be even more aggressive. Then remember MIT tells you, then remember that intent and capability make up a threat. They also agree that the intent is always going to be there. The only way we can actually reduce the threat is through capability, and the only way we reduce the capability for Putin to be more aggressive is to impose these sanctions, and we do this in 4 ways. The first is going to be coercive diplomacy. They say that there was 900 violations of these ceasefires, but we agree that they have been ineffective before. But now that the ceasefires are compounded by these sanctions, the violations dropped from 900 to 11. We're literally telling you that you cannot violate these ceasefires, or else we're going to harm your economy even more. That's the first reason why I vote for us. That's why the IMF finds that sanctions decrease the GDP by 9%, and Davis finds that we increase diplomacy by 2 times. The second reason why I vote for us is on military setback. They say that the military increased by 33%. What the card actually says is that it was 33% before, but then it shifted to 25% and it's projected to be 1% this year. But furthermore, remember, the third reason why vote for us is on unsustainable war. They say that there's trading with China, India, and the Middle East. But first of all, these deals have not even gone through. But second, and more importantly, if they really are trading with these other countries, they're just going to run out of money even faster. That means they have to pull out even more. That's why he said in Holland, he says that we have to pull back, or Russia has to pull back in 1 to 2 years because they're going to completely run out of money in the military. And Gaddy says it's going to be way too expensive for Russia to keep claiming more land. They have to stop. And then going on to setting a signal, remember that they say that we can't seize Mariupol, Odessa, and Tristan because we don't have enough money. Now going on to their case, first on retaliation and aggression as a whole, their 2 times evidence is actually from April. Ours post-states that because of the sanctions. Then remember that their 50,000 troop evidence comes from a tweet on Twitter. There's literally no reasoning behind it. And on to the Middle East, remember we don't have a capability anymore, and we already have 2 turns on Iran and Syria, and for these reasons, we strongly urge you to vote con, or pro.
Pro.
All right, we used 28 seconds last time. We'll just continue that. Stop. I got 55 used there.
Yes.
So 83 total.
Is everybody ready? So, brief halftime roadmap. I'm just going to go framework and voters. Okay. Let's first address this framework that they bring up in the last 2 speeches. So the reason why you're not going to be looking to this framework is that the resolution never asks us to defend an alternative world. That's not the burden of the negative team. Keeping that in mind, let's move on to the 2 main reasons why you're voting for us. The first one is going to be off of aggression. This is what they never respond to, which is military Keynesianism. They never factor this into any of their calculations. First of all, we tell you that Putin is actually increasing his military budget in order to jumpstart the economy. They never respond to that. But second of all, we're telling you he's taking money from other parts of the economy, like education, like pension, in order to increase his military spending. They never respond to that either. And as a result, you're seeing a 33% increase in military budget. They talk about how it's a projected increase, but we tell you that it's already happened as of 2015. So you're seeing that economic sanctions actually forced Putin to funnel even more money into his military budget. And you're seeing that this increase is actually manifesting in places like Ukraine. So first of all, we tell you that in Ukraine, Putin has already sent in 20,000 more troops. That's more violence, more aggression in the long term. But second of all, as a result of those additional troops, you're seeing a 2 times increase in deaths. That's after the Minsk 2 ceasefire. Obviously, the Minsk 1 ceasefire didn't work. The Minsk 2 ceasefire is not holding up either. But second of all, and this is really important because these are the 2 most recent pieces of evidence in today's round. First of all, as of December 28, 2015, Putin has already started to siege Mariupol. He's already escalating conflict in Donbass. But as of January 9th, 2016, that's really recent, he's already invaded Odessa. So insofar as that's true, you're seeing he's not only increasing his military budget by 33%, he's actually increasing all of his aggression, he's increasing deaths, he's increasing violence in Ukraine. The second reason why voting for us is going to be off of the Middle East. Remember that because of economic sanctions, Putin is now turning to places like the Middle East in order to replenish his economy. So as a result, he's pumping a lot of weapons into really volatile regions like Iran, like Jordan, like Egypt, everywhere, in order to fund his military. So for all these reasons, we strongly urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Alright, are you guys ready?
Yep.
Alright, So you continually extend this evidence that there's a 2 times increase in overall violence, right? So the sentence right before where you bold and underline 2 times, what date is it saying?
That has nothing to do with the part we're underlining. I encourage the judges to call
Yes,
this
I do
evidence.
too, because here's what it says.
Right.
It says a statement made by somebody in April 2014,
No,
and then it gives a sentence
It talks about
discussing that
the violations in the fall of 2015. The judges can call for this.
Just
if they
read the
have a
quote
problem
right
with
now.
this. I mean, I have to take it out. The
Huh?
judges
I can read
call
it for
this
you, just hand
directly.
me the evidence.
The judges can call this directly.
Alright,
You
sure,
can read
so
it
let's-
yourself.
Alright, I'll read it in my final focus for sure.
Right. Alright,
So,
so let's talk
we have
about...
a question. We have a question for you
Alright,
now.
go ahead.
So on your overview about alternatives, right? So can you point me to a place in the resolution where we have to defend an alternative?
okay, so here's the difference. We're not forcing you to defend an alternative, right? But at the very least, you have to defend a world without sanctions, and here's why.
Right. That's
Because
the
if-
world pre-sanctions.
No, not pre-sanctions. Where would we be without sanctions? And here's why.
So,
Because if
right,
we
a
would,
world without sanctions is the one before
not
2014
before, because if it was
sanctions.
getting worse before we imposed sanctions, we'd be in an even worse position now. And here, let me
Right,
explain
so-
why, right? If sanctions prevented that worse outcome from happening, then that is the benefit of sanctions.
So the resolution never asks us, are the sanctions the best way to do this? All it asks us, is the threat larger or smaller in the world with sanctions? That's all the judges have to decide.
Here's
we
why
don't have to
this
say
makes sense.
diplomacy is
So,
going to work better.
Let me
That's
explain
not
why.
our obligation in
I'll
today's round.
explain why, right? If you have a fire that's 10 feet tall and you make it 9 feet tall, it's still a fire, but we still reduce the threat. So if it would be worse
Right,
without sanctions,
so,
then it's
yeah,
still a
I
reduction.
agree. So basically, we agree that we need to look if the threat is smaller or bigger.
So
right
you agree
now,
that if
right?
we prove that if we had not imposed sanctions, the threat would have been way worse, then you agree that we
No,
win the
of
round.
course we don't agree that.
Why?
No, because
That makes
we're,
no sense, because that means that
That
sanctions
doesn't make-
prevented that outcome. That's a benefit of sanctions.
Right, but that's completely hypothetical on your part. We
Yeah,
are just
and we're going to
saying
debate that. That's the
sanctions
point of
are
this
making
round.
the situation worse.
Here-
That's all our burden
here's
is,
the
and your
point.
burden is to show it's
Alex, let me just
it's
explain
small.
really quickly, right? This round is a science experiment. We're testing whether something caused effects in the real world. What's happening in the real world is the same either way.
Sure,
what we're
yeah.
arguing is that it would have been worse without sanctions. The sanctions reduce the
So
threat.
how do you know that all of this stuff would have happened in a world
That's the
without
point of debate. We discuss what would it have been.
Right.
Otherwise,
so
there's
can
no
you
way
t-
to debate this.
Can you
and
tell
we
me
just-
definitively that they wouldn't have taken all these cities?
Yes, exactly. The Dreyer analysis says that Putin had plans to take Mariupol, Odessa, Transnistria back in
Right,
2014.
he's taking these cities
Yeah,
right now.
So Robert responded to that
I
in
said
his
that
speech.
even if they do seize these cities, they won't have enough money
So-
to seize them.
so
in
let me
the
actually
future.
talk about this, right?
Wait,
so-
okay, so
wait.
you're like 2 years theory of car, right?
No,
Or something.
no,
that's
not
different.
Yuria.
That's
Different. You
different.
never respond to the Gaddy evidence, which is about actually having the money to hold the land. So actually, can I discuss
Okay,
something really
wait,
quick?
but the problem is, like, none of your cards factor in the fact that Russia can gain money from outside investment. They can gain money from other
We
parts
responded
of
when they
their
said
economy.
overall investment in trade dropped 30%. That accounts for all these other factors.
And
Wait,
we also-
really
Not from
quickly.
trade.
Can we talk about Mariupol and Odessa really quickly?
Yes.
Both of those areas are very close to where Russia already was before sanctions, right?
No,
Our
that's
evidence
not
says that
true.
he easily could have taken Mariupol at any
no,
time.
okay, so I think you have your geography wrong here.
Uh,
Odessa is not
No,
close.
not
to-
Odessa,
yeah.
Mariupol. Odessa, he just
Right.
took out one oil rig. That's
No,
not
so
taking the
Odessa
city.
is the most recent piece of evidence from January 9th.
One oil
He's
rig is
invading
not
this
taking
area.
a city. He is
It
not
says
invading
he's think of it as a siege tactic, right? Just because he hasn't taken it there, he's marching toward that place.
No,
Just,
the
like,
point is,
just
in
because he hasn't
Mariupol,
done
his
it
troops
yet,
were
that's
already
not a
there, and in
benefit. You
Odessa,
can't
one
claim
oil
that.
rig doesn't
And
count.
that's time.
Yep. Okay. No. All right. Can I do the 2 times up just really quickly?
Yes.
I'll just read it this much. Oh, sorry. Okay. Cool. Are all the judges ready?
Yes.
Robert. Yep. Okay. Cool. What their evidence says is that in April 2014, the United Nations Human Rights Chief Zeid Rad Al Hussein said in a statement issued with the latest report by his agency's monitors that 400 civilians have been killed, more than double the number in the preceding 3 months. That's April 2014. It doesn't matter in the context of this debate. But even if that's true, there's a lot of empirics on Ukraine that we are winning. First is the January evidence from Strapper, which tells you that because of sanctions, ceasefire violations dropped 4-fold. He would violate the ceasefire either way, but now we have leverage on him, so he decreases propensity to violate the ceasefire, which is why it went from 900 to 11 in the last month. It's decreasing even more than 4-fold. Second is a 2.3 times reduction in conflict. They say it's from August. No, it's not. The IB times is from December. But also we tell you that post the new Minsk ceasefire, the Minsk 2 reinforcement that was based on sanctions in September, we saw an overall reduction of conflict to all-time lows. So with that in mind, they're not winning the Ukraine debate. Finally, they bring up that they went to Mariupol or Odessa. But understand that what he's doing there isn't taking the territory. He might try to destabilize the land. What Gaddy tells you in our case is he doesn't have the money to hold the territory, which means means that in the comparative analysis of the world with and without sanctions, it's always better to have sanctions so as military aggression is unsustainable. So here's where you're voting for us. First, on coercive diplomacy, we tell you it harms his economy, which is why he would have even signed an agreement in the first place. Maybe he violates it, but it's better that he signs it than he doesn't. Second is when we talk about military spending, the 33% and the social services don't matter, because if he cuts from his social services, he's just harming his economy even more and making it even more unsustainable, because that's the basis of his economy, which is why we say it went from 33 to 25 to 1% in 2016, and it's been increasing more than 30% every year for the last decade. This is the first year that it's actually been only a 1% increase. Next, on unsustainability, they say he'll get money from other places. They never respond to the Forbes evidence, which says that overall trade to Russia dropped by 30% post-sanctions. That includes other countries, because countries don't want to get involved in an economy that's already suffering from sanctions, and they definitely don't want to lend money to an internationally condemned country, which is why we say he pulls out in 1 or 2 years, and the Walker analysis that never gets responded to says that he's on the verge of ceding the entire Ukraine back, and for that reason, we outweigh every impact he talk about in the long term. Thus, we affirm.
We have 37 seconds left. We'll start that. All right, stop. All right, are all of my judges ready?
Yes.
Opponents? Joyce? Okay. Begin on how you should evaluate today's round. Remember that they dropped this alternative framework. Remember that the resolution never asks us to evaluate what is the best way to deal with this. It asks us if the threat is larger or smaller in the world with sanctions. At the end of the day, if the threat is much larger, then you should vote con in today's debate. There are 2 key voting issues. First is the Middle East. This is massively undercovered by my opponents, and they just dropped this in their final focus. Remember that because sanctions reduce Russia's access to Western economies, that means he turns to other places. In fact, we've seen this in the real world. He's actually made multi-million dollar arms deals with Egypt and Jordan, and is trading S-300 missiles with Iran. In fact, this is a really big impact to Western interests, because now Iran has a major superpower backing them up, and now Iran can power project, and their hegemony can go increased, and it's unrepelled by Western forces because they have these ballistic missile systems. This is a very large threat to Western interests, because the Middle East is getting only more brazen and more hegemony in that area. With that in mind, the second voting issue is aggression and Ukraine. They never respond to 2 links here. First is military Keynesianism. Because sanctions are destroying Russia's economy, Putin thinks that a way to jumpstart his economy is to spend more on the military. You can call for our evidence. In 2015, after sanctions, this has materialized in a 33% increase in spending. That directly translates to a more capable Russian military and more capacity to carry out more lethal attacks. Secondly, they say that they can't sustain war, but that doesn't matter insofar as Putin is fundamentally expansionist and takes money from all the different other sectors of his economy, like education, pension, and turns to these arms deals to replenish his money. At the end of the day, all of his money's going back into the military budget, and they never prove to you this hypothetical pulling out in 2 years. This has been seen in numerous ways. The most important is evidence from December 28th showing that they're increasing escalation in the Donbass region, and they're invading Mariupol, and from January 9th that they're invading Odessa. On all fronts in all 3 areas, Russia's only increasing aggression. We've seen a doubling of deaths and sending 20,000 more troops. All of these pieces of evidence are reasons to negate, because they're only escalating the conflict even further. Because a world with sanctions is much more dangerous and lives are being lost, we urge you to negate. Thank you.